Hello and welcome to Masking for It, the podcast with a purpose, combining clinical insight with lived experience. Join us as we explore the realities of high-masking neurodivergent adults, debunk myths around autism and ADHD, and challenge outdated and harmful systems as we discuss the ways we can help neurodivergent people not just survive, but thrive. We're here so that the hidden can feel seen, the confused can find clarity, and the future can be different, because it needs to be. You can help us massively by following or subscribing, and in return, we can continue to bring you along behind the scenes with expert guests, pioneering research, and the chance to say you were a part of the change that we're creating. So, let's do this.
Hello there. Thank you for joining us again today, and we are here to talk about some news from this week. It'll be a couple of weeks ago once this goes out, but we needed to talk about it. That is the delays of the SEND reform, which we've been waiting for a long time. So what we wanted to do today is talk about some of the whys that are surrounding that, but also some of what we see as the consequences for that and anything that we could potentially do in the meantime. So I will hand over to Lesley to start this. She has Bridget Phillipson's official announcement about this, and we'll go from there.
I'd just like to clarify, I don't know Bridget. She's not let me know personally. It is something that's been released. Although, Bridget, if you are listening, we would be really happy to talk to you and offer you a cup of tea, piece of toast, a biscuit, anything like that. So Bridget's official letter to talk about the SEND reform, the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities reform, is to help us deliver the most effective set of reforms we can. I've taken the decision to have a further period of co-creation, testing our proposals with the people who matter most in this reform, the families, alongside teachers and other experts. So I think one of our biggest reactions was another delay, really, another delay, which the word delay permeates people's experience of special educational needs and disabilities of their lives. The families delayed. Teachers don't want delays. There's children in classrooms that shouldn't be in those classrooms because they need extra support. So delay again, and the whole bigger picture of the reform, it's frustrating to hear the word delay. But actually, if the delay is to reach a wider audience and help us to listen to people who matter, the families and the children that are involved, then great, as long as that is the genuine purpose of delaying, because without that, there is no really reliable reform, and it needs to be completely deconstructed and rebuilt. The whole system. I think we talk about systems a lot, don't we?
Yeah, and I think it was really welcome to see what the Education Select Committee came out with, that recognised the importance of statutory responsibility, legal rights for children to an education, regardless of their needs or ways of learning, because I think that's been a massive concern across, families, parents, but also professionals that work in the space, that without those rights and without those legal protections, nothing happens. And there's a fundamental thing that I think comes across from lots of different people that are involved in SEND and SEND support, is that there isn't a problem with the law, it's a problem with how it's applied and the delays in which it is applied and the fight that's involved in getting to a point of getting the support that is clear that somebody needs.
And I don't think either of you be surprised how sceptical I am, given it's a government that's already, when it's been in power, taken these issues off the table, and when it came into power this time has already done nothing but target the most vulnerable in our society, be that elderly people or disabled people. So does this make sense that they're doing this? Yeah. And I would love to think it's purely so they can do a better job. But I think they've immediately missed how urgent this issue is to start with, and that part of needing a better job is that it needs some urgent attention, and they've just missed that point entirely, thinking it's worth delaying anything. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think it's just the impact of these delays and what you're both seeing.
Yeah, I think we hear an awful lot of people coming to us for support because something has gone wrong. School has become incredibly problematic. So either people are in school and really struggling in school, and that's having a massive impact on their mental well-being and their relationships with within the family and kind of with people outside of the family. Or school's no longer possible because it's such a difficult environment that children and young people are saying, I can't do it anymore, and have got to the point of absolute burnout. And the focus on attendance above all else just causes so many problems for people. So, but those happen because the needs of the person aren't recognised, and there's a delay in services providing any kind of support because of the enormous waiting lists for assessment within the NHS, and schools paralysed by the idea that they can't do anything until a formal diagnosis is in place and they have specific recommendations for that individual young person or individual child, when we know that's not the case, that actually there's so much that you can do within that school environment that it doesn't need to be recommended by somebody with letters after the name. It's just a good way of supporting all children and young people. So I think that there's the delay in getting the support for people that then has that impact on anything happening in a meaningful way that then erupts into massive problems for people that have a long-lasting impact and are there with people for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, when you're the wrong little person in that wrong environment, just feels hideous. And I think the biggest impact of delay for me, because it's a really, really difficult one, obviously we'll never know what it would have been like if I'd known. So I don't know whether it's one of those things, maybe it's a blessing we didn't know, so that we just carried on as usual, and I had the education I did and learned the social strategies and coping mechanisms I did, so that I can turn up anywhere in the world, in any setting and do anything. Maybe that's better because I don't think, I wouldn't manage that, or, I wasn't ever limited or told, no, you can't do that. Like, I've been able to give everything a shot. However, the price of that has been pretty damn high. If you think of the chronic illnesses I deal with, the mental health challenges I deal with, and that's on a day-to-day basis. And I also don't know how possible some of those things are to truly heal from, as much as I'm constantly trying. You know, we know I have PTSD from school. I know that's something you told me, Lesley, and that was the least shocking part of everything. But it's not that there was any one big event. It's that it's lots of little traumas, in a way of, it's the repetition, and it's the fact that you're at such a vulnerable age when you're taking in and learning about yourself, all the messages you're hearing. You're at such a time when you are an absolute sponge and blank canvas, and you're getting more negative messages than ever. Is 20,000 extra negative messages before the age of 12 if you're neurodivergent than other children you receive. And I feel that and know that. And I think if we'd known earlier, at least we could have looked at what my strengths were. Because if you seem competent enough academically and there's nothing massively wrong, you don't get much attention paid to you. They think you must be all right. But that's problematic when then your behaviour doesn't match that and you're not as studious and you're not actually trying for those academic results. That's when they start getting frustrated, because it's almost like you don't deserve to be getting those results. Or I guess sometimes maybe they think, gosh, if you tried what you could do. But I think there's much less of that than we need you to be doing it in this way. And I think as long as diagnosis or just honouring that children work in different ways is delayed, you're just gaslighting the hell out of children on a daily basis for years. And you're not telling me that doesn't have an impact, a profound impact, to the point I ended up in hospital at the age of 15, 16 with glandular fever. And what you quite rightly identified was probably just massive burnout. I was masking like anything. I was doing so well in that way, and doing the performance amazingly. But my body was feeling the impact of all of those years of criticism, and it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And then the wheels came off. I was in hospital. And then after that, I couldn't get the wheels back on, and I couldn't get right socially again. Academics, just like my work, was the least of my priorities because it was just surviving on a social basis every day at that point. And I do think if my diagnosis hadn't been delayed, if we did have a system where kids are just screened as a group, as a normal practice when they're younger, I could have received so much less criticism because they know why my behaviour was my behaviour, because it wasn't actually especially bad. It just wasn't what they wanted. And I'd have been able to, instead of having to just socially survive, because I was finding that the hardest bit, maybe I'd have been able to get interested in learning then, because I really am now and I love it now. And I've always been really curious, but I think even my curiosity was squashed in lessons back then because they, again, didn't know why I was asking why so much. And it's because I was curious. I wanted to know. I was interested. But even that was squashed then. So actually, no wonder I just focused on the social, because I thought, well, they don't want me to be curious at the academic stuff. So I didn't get to make the most of the education that I could have. And I didn't get to see what my potential could have been, because I was too busy surviving. And then my health became so bad from all of the environments I was in and the trauma of that gradually mounted up, that, by the time I left school and should have been able to know who I was and what I wanted to do, I was absolutely clueless. I got drawn into an abusive relationship because I was the perfect, vulnerable, lost victim. And since then, I've just been trying to make up for it and not let it be that bad. And that shame and that guilt still is part of what drives me every day, but also makes me hate being here. Not to sound too morbid, but it's really hard. It's with me constantly, because those ages are when everything goes in. They're so formative, and children need to be allowed to be who they are, not have it constantly squashed, not have their curiosity squashed, or, you can't have a kid running around being loud in lessons and doing stuff, but don't make them feel like they're a bad person for it. That's not a morally bad thing. We need to get a bit of a grip on what's good and bad in life, and not just squash children so that you can do your job in some ways. I know I was particularly unfortunate because I know there are some amazing teachers out there. And, you know, they do try and make the best of whichever child they've got in front of them. And I think that's easier as there's a bit more awareness coming around now. But I think has the fact that I only got my diagnosis in adulthood had a profound impact upon my life? Absolutely. And I'll never know what it could have been. And I don't sit and blame it and think, oh, well, there's no point in me trying. Everyone else messed it up for me. I don't feel like that because I still, well, actually, after the diagnosis, that empowered me more to feel like, oh, okay, I can do something about this because I now know who I am and why. And I can honour that and harness that now. But whilst you don't know, your teachers are frustrated with you because they don't know. You're frustrated with you. Everybody loses. And I think education's got to become able to handle the different kinds of minds there are, whether it's neurodivergent or just different types of neurotypical people, because all kids have different strengths. So I think setting it up to handle the different types of people will only be a positive for everybody, and it won't do anybody any harm. But these delays are doing people harm. I live it and many others do, and that's exactly what we need to change. So the delay further of this SEND report is inexcusable because it's already decades too late.
Yeah. And I think one of the things it really needs to look at is the flexibility within the education system. And I think one of the things that impacts upon schools being able to be flexible is all the targets they have to meet. One of them in particular around attendance, and there's other targets around, you know, exam results and SATs and things, when school is so much more than that. And I absolutely value education. Education saved me. If I hadn't got an education, I don't know where I would be in life. I absolutely really respect education. I think one of the things that I seem to be harping on about a lot lately is comparative psychology. And I think it helps us to think about how humans behave because we are animals. And if you think about one of the fundamental things that now I think is in every school is that kids are locked in and cannot escape. And I think there's something about being neurodivergent within that, but I think there's something innate in all of us, is that when animals are confined, whether it's in a zoo or in a laboratory or factory farming, they show behaviours that are really very, very different from animals that are able to choose to do what they do in the wild. And they're behaviours that show stress, frustration and anxiety and learned helplessness. So for example, very often you see animals doing repetitive behaviours, things like pacing back and forth or over grooming, or you might see animals just stop exploring, stop interacting with the world. So almost like in a depression state. So that the interest is not there, the interest and engagement is not there. You see animals engaging in self-mutilation, which we see so much self-harm in young people now. All of these things we see in children in schools, and we see disruptive behaviour, and we see, you know, engaging in what we might call inappropriate ways with other people, maybe thinking about trying to do what our day-to-day normal lives would allow us to do. It's not possible for a caged animal, and it becomes impossible for a caged child. And unless we've got some flexibility about where children can go and the flexibility of the curriculum and timings of school, then we're going to end up with a double whammy. There's the neurodivergent issue around people needing education to be different, and it might be around the environment because of sensory needs, for example, or it might be something relating to how they need to learn, like visually rather than verbally. But also we've got this whole other second layer of children being distressed within an environment that then leads to behaviours that they then get told off for. And that's when I think teachers are getting frustrated by behaviours because it disrupts the class. They're there to teach. So if you've got people rocking and twirling and standing up and shouting out, picking, throwing things, then that's when children start to get told off and get behaviour points, because it's really difficult to manage a child who's doing that in the classroom. But if we understand it as that's a natural animal reaction to being caged and being cooped up in a place that's not natural for you to be, we've got to have some flexibility within the SEND system, and delays don't allow that. Waiting for EHCPs for years on end, challenging EHCP decisions. By the time that's happened, years of a child's life have gone by without that flexibility. And I think flexibility has got to be at the basis of all of this SEND reform. And I know it will be difficult to put in place, but it has to be some flexibility. Get rid
Yeah,
of a lot of these charts and ratings that schools have to
yeah.
comply.
I think the thing that I really reflect on, kind of since my own sort of starting school, is that the delays also then cause a narrative around those children. So there's the very deep and personal impact on the individual, like you've really well described, Alexandra, that it's a horrible experience and the impact that has for the rest of your life. But it also develops the narratives that children have about each other, and that, um, that those children are being punished for behaviour, for being disruptive. Then they're labelled the naughty child, and the children around them then understand difference as being naughty or not conforming. And you take that learning through the rest of your life, don't you? And I think something I'm really mindful of doing with my own son is, well, challenging some of that and talking to him about why children might be behaving in that way and why that might be really difficult for them. But, other children in his class won't be having those conversations with their parents because they don't have the same background as me. And I find that again, that delay in the systems then disrupt how a more positive narrative can be created about that child or those children within the classroom, and that the peer understanding of that individual is is delayed from developing in a positive way.
And we get that othering, don't we, that we just
Yeah,
talked about, in terms of how witches were treated. People become suspicious and push people away and say, I don't want anything to do with you because you're not
yeah,
like me.
yeah. You rejected and excluded from the class, and we could spend an entire episode, couldn't we, talking about playground politics and all of that stuff. But it has massive implications, doesn't it, on the child themselves, the class as a whole, the teacher, and the wider school community, but also on the parents and how the parents are perceived by other parents, and how they're treated in their communities that they exist in.
Mm.
Yeah.
Now, I remember we were doing a project over at one of my friends' houses, and there were a few of us. And this is where the ADHD really was there. I used to get quite hyper, and just, to me, it was just more exciting. There were a few of us over our friend's house, but they were really studious and, and I remember my friend saying to me, my mum says you're far too noisy and distracting and all this. And I just thought, oh, that's really nice. Your mum's been having a word about me to you and behind my back. She didn't say anything to me, or you just get judgment from all over the place. And, even in adults just going, ugh, at your behaviour rather than thinking about, oh, should we try and get the group to do this or that? It's just too easy to criticize than understand. So I think what we know as well and what we see is not only sort of personal consequences in I mean, mine could have been a lot worse if I didn't have the support unit I do around me, which I'm immensely grateful for, but I'm hugely mindful, if I didn't have that, I really, really don't think I'd be here for a start. But even if I was, I don't believe I could necessarily get a job. Maybe I wouldn't have a home as a result of that. I really don't know what would happen to me. And I'm very, very aware of that. But also we see when there hasn't been support. Gail, when we spoke offline earlier, you mentioned the Southport case. And I think that's something we should address as well around delays, because, you know, there's the parts where it makes your health and your mental health bad, but there's parts where actually it has huge consequences on society. You know, people might not care about me individually or people like me individually, but I'm sure, you know, that case rocked the whole country.
Yeah, and I think that idea that, you know, there was a big delay before he was assessed and diagnosed as autistic meant that other services and other support weren't put in place. It seems from what's been reported that the response was, well, we can't do anything until that diagnosis is in place. That diagnosis wasn't prioritised, and therefore there was an 8-month gap before anything kind of was put in place. And the damage that was then done, because people weren't addressing the concerns that were being flagged by school and the people that were seeing him, had an absolutely catastrophic and horrific impact on Southport and the rest of the UK, you know, in terms of how people have then had to respond. Certainly when I've been helping at guides now, you know, the door's always locked and we're very conscious of maintaining security because of that and that incident. And you just think, but why was there a delay? Why did anybody have to wait for an official bit of paper to say something? Why couldn't the support and the issues be addressed without that in a everybody has knowledge or should have knowledge in how to work with neurodivergent people and how to work with neurodivergent people that are displaying significantly worrying behaviours. And it shouldn't need that piece of paper. There should not be that delay.
And it strikes me, he didn't just have a bad week. You know, that behaviour will have been there for a while. You know, when it's somebody that deeply disturbed. And I think it's always really hard whenever you hear in the media, because I remember a story years ago where an autistic child had pushed somebody off of a building and all you kept hearing was about how he was autistic. But even then, I didn't know about the condition, but I just thought, well, hang on, how's the autism relevant, as if we should all be wary of autistic people doing stuff like that now? It's really misleading how the spotlight gets put on it when incidents like this happen, because it's not the autism that's intrinsically made that behaviour happen, but it's that individual has potentially gone through different traumas, has potentially, you know, one of the traits of neurodivergence has latched on to something perhaps and got a bit obsessive about something. But those things in themselves don't mean every autistic person's going to become obsessed with the wrong thing and act on it, because there have to be other issues going on and a lack of the support and everything around them. And what we're saying is that support needed to be there a lot earlier on. That person did not get to that stage of behaving like that overnight. Where was that previously? And, you know, it's been reported that actually even at the time, the woman who had been interacting with him and looking after his case had majorly raised flags. So despite the state of the system or anything, if someone's raising flags like that, how are there not mechanisms there? Because that's not just a waiting list issue and, oh, his thing was delayed. Why wasn't there action taken then? And that becomes a different case. It's not just about the waiting list. And we can't keep blaming that either, because demand's going up as our knowledge is going up, quite rightly. So we've got to stop criticising the demand going up and start saying, oh, okay, we're going to have to do this a bit differently. And I just think there's a million things from my life experience, from things out there. And even Matt Hancock, you've got to give him credit for what he proposed of that screening universally, because then as well, no one's getting othered or picked out for anything. And it's not about labeling anybody. It's about, okay, which environment do you need? And we can tailor things to everybody, neurodivergent or not.
Absolutely. It's picking it up early, isn't it? And I suppose there's something about, if you look at why people are getting picked up in mental health services and why people get picked up in forensic services, because in those places, there might be more chance that they get an autism assessment or an ADHD assessment. If they're just bumbling along without kind of having a crisis, then they're just on a list. And I used to work in adult forensic services, and most of the women that I worked with in a secure service, in a secure ward, were autistic, and actually they weren't dangerous people. They were actually people who'd had years and years of oppression and abuse, and were in that ward, most of them, because they'd been abused by other people, and they'd done something in a big crisis to try and protect themselves. That was the general narrative of most people, and actually mostly being abused by men. And I think there's something about people being vulnerable and people acting in a way in a crisis that then leads them to mental health services or leads them into forensic services, and then lo and behold they're autistic, and it skews the narrative, because by the time someone gets to that point, it's gone, really wrong. And then then that's what's reported in the media. Oh, well, we've found out they're autistic. Oh, and there we go. It's like the witches. These autistic people must be blooming dangerous. And that used to be the narrative about schizophrenia in the 80s, was people who are mentally ill are dangerous. And I think there's something about screening that just means that psychologists, speech and language therapists, occupational therapists are working in schools, not in a separate service, but to receive children in preschool, early primary school, and having working in classrooms alongside teachers and families. And some of this divide will be removed, because we can say, well, that child there will be much better suited in a smaller class, or these particular children in this school all need to learn for a really long period of the day outside or moving. This set of children learn really visually. So we could maybe make classrooms not just based on an ability or apparent academic ability, but about what kind of learning do children need, and that's the basis of teachers' training. How do people learn? Well, I think what's massively missing is that understanding of regulation, and when people are distressed and caged, what do they do? How do they behave? That's when they become naughty, in inverted commas.
And doing things certain ways just because they've always been done that way. I mean, look at where we're at. I don't think that's necessarily something we need to cling on to for dear life, because we'll never know how many people didn't make it to a mental health service to get picked up. We'll never know how many we've lost that just went, I can't do this. And there will be so many. And ultimately, I think another issue with that is that if you are being helped in the wrong way, if you're being given the wrong medication, if you're being given, actually, there is such a thing as the wrong therapy. That's actually really damaging, because I know I've had therapy that didn't suit me before numerous times because it's touted as the therapy. And it made me feel worse, because I just thought, why doesn't this work for me? Why can't I can't even do the therapy. Like, even that doesn't work. You just feel so hopeless, and that does more damage than good. So if you're finding out about people as well, it's not just about education, it's about if they need help, what sort of help's likely to help them? What sort of issues are these people likely to have? The crossover between women and eating disorders or things like that, for instance. People then can have an awareness around those things already. But the more we bury our heads in the sand, and the more we think we've just got to throw more at it. And things like locking the school, I understand from the security point of view, like you say, Gail, but beyond that, like for the children themselves and their autonomy around a building itself, it's got to loosen up, because it's not a case of just restrict. That's what's making everybody, that's sort of being the bottleneck that everyone's trying to break out from. And that's what's causing this tipping point.
Well, I think
And
schools are
it's,
restricted, aren't they, by that? Because as a parent of 2 children who struggle to go to school, I think one of the things that was thrown back at me very, very, very frequently was, well, we have no code for this, and we now have no absence code for this situation. And I do remember in one meeting, I might have sworn a little bit, and I might have said something like, I don't really care what your absence code is. That's not really relevant to me. And I think schools get really frustrated with it as well, because if children need to be off because they've broken a leg, it's really clear. And if children need to be off because their mental well-being is not as good as it could be, then we have to go and find a doctor or someone to write a letter. And, it actually, if there was a bit more flexibility within the system to allow people, like we did in COVID, to work from home, watch a lesson online, just like they allow university students to do, then people's well-being is improved just by the fact they're not caged and required to be somewhere when they're not okay to do that.
mm-hmm. I think that the main thing is that the approach taken at the minute is very much, we'll deal with it when they're in prison, we'll deal with it when they make it to the mental health setting. I'll come and see you and Gail when I reach 26 and my life is just not worth living. It's got to stop being that way round. It's got to stop being, we'll deal with the problems later on, because actually that's the expensive way to do it. And expensive as in the toll it takes on a person, but also financially expensive for the country. We could turn things around massively if we can get in there early. And let's see what these SEND reforms come out with. I don't believe they'll be anywhere near that drastic. But, we've got to keep bringing conversation out. Maybe they'll listen in that time. Maybe that's why there's a delay. But yeah, can dream, and we'll see.
Yeah, we're talking about it. It's important, isn't it? And I suppose that's
Yeah.
what we're trying to do, isn't it?
Yeah. That is all for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you come back next time. Please follow or subscribe so that you don't miss a thing. And if you'd like even more of us, you can go over to www.maskingforit.com and find more episodes and blogs on our website, which get into some nitty-gritty detail, because we do love that. And you can also get in touch with us if there's something that we haven't covered, or you have any questions, or something about your experience that you'd like to share. Then please send that to us via email. It's contact@maskingforit.com, or any of our socials, which are @maskingforitpodcast. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you so much for being here as we bring the conversation out to the real big world to see if we can change it just that little bit. Thank you so much for being a part of it, and we'll see you next time.